A massive shadow moves through the frozen peaks of Montana. Is it a beast seeking prey, or a spirit seeking peace? Deep in the snow, a rusted collar lies forgotten. It bears the name of a prince, but the creature watching from the darkness is a warrior. How did a beloved pet from a sun-drenched valley become the ghost of the high Rockies? What happens when the heart of a dog is forced to embrace the law of the wolf, and when the ultimate betrayal strikes, will he choose mercy or a terrifying revenge? Stay with us to uncover the legend of the silver tip. Please support our mission by subscribing to the channel. Chapter 1. The Ghost of the High Rockies. The wind does not just blow in the high peaks of Montana. It screams. It claws at the skin like an icy predator. Tonight, the blizzard is a white wall of chaos. High above the timberline, a small orange glow flickers against the oppressive dark. A campfire. Around the flames, 4 hunters huddle close. Their faces are weathered, etched with the lines of men who have seen too many winters. They do not talk about the elk they missed, or the trails that vanished under the snow. Instead, they speak in hushed tones. They speak of the ghost. I saw it again near the Blackfoot Ridge. One man whispers, his voice trembling slightly. A wolf the size of a grizzly, grayer than a tombstone. And those eyes, they aren't the eyes of a beast. They look right through your soul. The other men nod. They have all heard the stories. The legend of the shadow. Suddenly the wind drops to a low moan. A heavy, suffocating silence falls over the camp. The fire crackles, throwing long, dancing shadows against the pines. One hunter freezes. His hand hovers over his rifle. "Look," he breathes. Just beyond the reach of the firelight, 2 burning orbs of amber emerge from the gloom. They are steady, unblinking. The eyes of a creature that knows no fear. Slowly, the beast steps forward into the dim light. He is magnificent. He is a giant among his kind, a massive wolf-dog hybrid with a frame built of iron and bone. His fur is the color of charcoal after a forest fire. Deep, dark, dense, but across his broad shoulders and powerful chest, streaks of silver-white shimmer like moonlight on a frozen lake. This is Shadow. A warrior bearing the deep marks of 1,000 battles. His face is a map of survival. A jagged scar runs near his left ear. His muzzle is gray with age. He stands perfectly still, a statue of muscle and fur. The hunters hold their breath. They see the thick mane around his neck darker and wilder than the rest of his coat. And then they see it. His tail. It is a great shaggy brush, dark as the night, ending in a startling pure white tip. The silver tip. Shadow does not snarl. He does not bare his teeth. He simply watches. There is a profound sadness in his gaze, a lingering connection to a world he no longer inhabits. He looks at the humans, and for a fleeting moment he remembers the touch of a kind hand. Then the wind howls again. Shadow turns. With a grace that defies his massive size, he vanishes into the swirling white. He is gone as quickly as a dream. One of the hunters stands up, shaking. He grabs a flashlight and shines it toward the spot where the beast stood. The beam of light cuts through the falling snow. There, pressed deep into the freezing powder, is a single massive paw print. But next to the print, something else catches the light. A flash of orange rust. The hunter kneels down, brushing away the snow with his glove. His fingers tremble as he pulls an object from the icy earth. It is a collar. The leather is cracked and stiff. The buckle is corroded by decades of rain and snow. It is a relic of a civilized world, an object of bondage and belonging. The hunter wipes the dirt from the small brass nameplate. His breath hitches in his chest. Why would a wolf stay near this? he asks the wind. He looks out into the darkness, but the ghost is gone. Shadow is already miles away, climbing toward the stars. The camera moves closer to the metal plate. The firelight catches the faded engravings. One word is still visible. Sterling. The cold Montana wind fades away. The sound of the blizzard transforms into the gentle humming of bees. The white snow begins to melt into a sea of vibrant green grass. The jagged peaks of the Rockies soften into rolling hills. The air is no longer frozen. It is warm. It smells of wild roses and freshly turned earth. We are leaving the ghost behind. We are going back. Back to the beginning. Back to the sun-drenched valley where a prince once lived. Before the scars. Before the hunger. Before the call of the wild changed everything. Chapter 2. The Prince of Bitterroot Valley. The world was once a place of gold and honey. In the heart of the Bitterroot Valley, the sun did not just shine. It embraced the earth. The air was heavy with the scent of wild clover and the sweet, dry breath of the Montana hayfields. This was the realm of the Sterling estate. And in this realm, Shadow was king. He was a creature of magnificent contradictions, a giant among dogs, a whisper of the wild living in a world of manicured lawns. Shadow spent his afternoons draped across the wide cedar porch of the judge's manor. His charcoal gray fur absorbed the warmth of the mountain sun. The silver-white streaks across his chest shimmered like polished nickel. He was a wolf dog of immense proportions, a frame built of heavy bone and supple muscle. Yet he moved with the quiet dignity of a scholar. To the judge's grandchildren, he was a gentle guardian. He would lie perfectly still as they buried their small, sticky hands in his thick mane. He would let them climb over his massive back, his amber eyes glowing with a calm, patient affection. He was their protector, their silent, loyal shadow. But when the sun dipped below the jagged horizon, a different fire woke within him. He would stand at the edge of the golden pastures. He would look toward the dark silhouette of the mountains. His ears would twitch at sounds no human could hear. The snap of a distant twig, the frantic heartbeat of a rabbit, the ancient, lonely song of the wind. In those moments, Shadow was not a pet. He was a force of nature, a wild spirit held in place by the invisible golden thread of love. He was happy. He was safe. He believed the world was a place of eternal kindness. Then came the night the gold turned to lead. Manuel was a man of shadows and nervous habits. He worked in the gardens, but his heart was in the dark rooms where cards were dealt and fortunes were lost. The debts had piled up like winter snow. The men Manuel owed money to did not accept excuses. They wanted silver. And Manuel knew where to find it. It was a quiet evening. The judge was away in the city. The house was still. Shadow sat by the garden gate, his great shaggy tail sweeping the dust. He saw Manuel approaching. The man's hands were shaking. His eyes darted back and forth. Shadow sensed the unease, but he felt no fear. Manuel was a friend. Manuel provided treats and cool water. Long Trung Than was not a choice for Shadow. It was his very soul. "Come here, boy," Manuel whispered. His voice was thin and brittle. "Let us go for a walk. Just you and me." Shadow stood. He let out a low, friendly huff. The white tip of his tail wagged once a signal of trust. He followed Manuel past the stables. He followed him past the familiar boundaries of the estate. They walked toward the lonely crossroads where the orchard met the forest. A heavy wagon waited there. A man with a face like scarred leather sat in the driver's seat. Shadow stopped. His instincts screamed. The air near the wagon smelled of old iron and fear. He looked at Manuel. He looked for a sign that this was a game, but Manuel would not look back. Suddenly, a rope snaked through the air. It tightened around Shadow's thick neck. Shadow roared. It was a sound that belonged to the deep woods. He lunged forward, his massive muscles bunching under his charcoal fur. He could have torn the rope. He could have crushed Manuel's arm with a single snap of his jaws. But he hesitated. This was Manuel. This was a human. In that second of hesitation, a heavy club descended. The world exploded into white light, then darkness. When Shadow woke, the sun was gone. The gold was gone. He was no longer on the cedar porch. He was cramped inside a wooden crate. The air was foul. It smelled of oil and coal smoke. His head throbbed with a dull, sickening pain. He tried to stand, but his head struck the top of the box. He growled a low vibration that shook his entire frame. He threw his weight against the slats. The wood groaned, but it did not break. He was a prisoner. For the first time in his life, Shadow felt a cold, sharp blade in his heart. It was not the pain of the club. It was the pain of betrayal. The people who had loved him had disappeared. The man who had fed him had sold him like a sack of grain. He felt the crate being lifted. He felt the jarring motion as it was tossed onto a metal floor. Men laughed nearby. Cruel, hollow laughter that held no warmth. "Big one, isn't he?" one man remarked. "He'll fetch a high price in the north. They need bone and brawn for the ice." North. Ice. The words meant nothing to Shadow. He only knew that the wind was getting colder. He pressed his nose against the gaps in the wood. He searched for the scent of wild roses. He searched for the smell of the judge's tobacco. But there was only the smell of grease. Suddenly, a massive roar erupted. The very ground beneath the crate began to tremble. It was a monster of steam and iron. The train. The wheels began to turn. Slowly at first. Chug, chug, chug. Then they gained speed. The rhythm became a steady, mechanical heartbeat. A heartbeat that was taking him away from everything he had ever known. Shadow curled into a ball. His amber eyes were wide and filled with a terrifying realization. The Prince of Bitterroot Valley was dead. The white tip of his tail lay still in the filth of the crate. A long, mournful whistle pierced the night. It echoed off the mountains. It carried the sound of a funeral. The train sped into the darkness, leaving the golden fields behind, heading toward a land where mercy did not exist. Shadow closed his eyes. He began to forget the warmth of the sun. He began to remember the strength in his blood. The wild was calling, but this time it was calling for a warrior. Chapter 3. The Law of the Club and Fang. The iron wheels finally stopped their endless screaming. The door of the crate was hammered open. The air that rushed in was not the sweet breath of the valley. It was a blade of ice. It sliced into Shadow's lungs. He was dragged out by a heavy chain. His legs were stiff. His muscles were cramped. He stumbled onto the frozen ground of a desolate camp. This was the borderland, a place where the earth was iron and the sky was lead. In the center of the yard stood a man. He wore a heavy red sweater that looked like a stain against the white snow. In his hand, he held a thick, knotted club. Shadow's blood boiled. The betrayal of the garden, the dark terror of the train, the hunger in his gut. It all rose up in a singular wave of fury. He was a prince. He was a warrior. He would not be led like a sheep. He let out a roar that silenced the wind. He lunged. 150 pounds of charcoal fur and raw power aimed at the man's throat. But the man did not flinch. He was a professional, a breaker of spirits. The club swung in a short, brutal arc. It caught Shadow mid-air. The impact was a sickening thud. Shadow crashed to the snow, his vision spinning. He stood up again. He was Shadow. He did not quit. He lunged a second time. The club fell again, and again, and again. Shadow lay in the slush, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked up at the man in the red sweater. The man was not angry. He was not even cruel. He was simply teaching a lesson. In that moment, Shadow's world view shifted forever. He looked at the club. He realized it was a law, the law of the master. A man with a club was a god of sorts. He was a power that could not be overcome by teeth or courage. One must obey. One must endure. But as Shadow's amber eyes watched the man, something deeper changed. He would obey the club, but he would never ever love the hand that held it. The days that followed were a descent into the primitive. The camp was filled with other dogs, starving dogs, broken dogs. They did not play. They did not wag their tails. They fought over frozen scraps of fish and gristle. Shadow's shaggy charcoal fur, once brushed and soft, became a matted shield of ice and mud. The silver-white streaks on his chest were stained with the gray of the camps. Frost clung to his mane like tiny diamonds. He learned to eat like a wolf. He learned to bolt his food in seconds before another could steal it. He learned to sleep with one eye open. He learned to read the wind for danger. His amber eyes, once warm and patient, began to harden. The light of the domestic pet was dying. The fire of the ancient wolf was waking up. He watched the other dogs. He saw them fall. He saw them die in the snow when their hearts gave out. He vowed he would not be one of them. His bones were too big. His spirit was too old. One morning, two men entered the yard. They walked with the heavy, purposeful stride of those who live on the trail. One was Perrault, a man with a face like a dried walnut. The other was Francois, a giant with a kind but firm voice. They were mail carriers for the government. They needed strength. They needed endurance. Perrault stopped in front of Shadow. He looked at the dog's massive frame. He looked at the thick charcoal coat and the powerful legs. He saw the scars on Shadow's ears and the intelligence in his gaze. "Sacred smoke," Perrault whispered. "Look at the size of this one." Francois knelt down. He did not reach out his hand. He knew better. He looked at the white tip of Shadow's tail. He saw a warrior. "He has the bones of a giant," Francois said, "and the eyes of a king. He will pull the sled like a demon." Gold changed hands. The man in the red sweater nodded. The transaction was complete. Shadow felt a different kind of hand on his collar. It was firm, but it did not strike. He was led toward a long line of harnesses and a heavy sled. The wind began to pick up. The snow began to fall in thick, heavy flakes. Shadow stood at the back of the team. He looked at the vast white horizon. The valley was gone. The judge was a memory. The law of the club had broken his heart, but it had made his blood strong. Francois cracked a whip over the team's heads. "Mush!" he cried. The sled lurched forward. Shadow dug his claws into the frozen earth. He felt the weight of the load. He felt the rhythm of the pack. The transformation was beginning. The prince was becoming a soldier, and deep within his soul, the wild was starting to hum a song of war. Chapter 4. The Rise of the Alpha. The harness was a web of leather and pain. Shadow stood in the frozen traces, his heavy charcoal paws sinking into the crust of the snow. To his left and right, the other dogs whined and shivered. They were a ragged crew of huskies and hounds. But at the very front of the line stood Coda. Coda was a lean white husky with a jagged tear in his ear and eyes like shards of ice. He was the lead dog. He ruled the pack through fear and a quick snapping jaw. From the moment Shadow joined the line, Koda's lip curled in a silent snarl. The white dog saw the size of Shadow. He saw the massive frame and the majestic mane. He saw a threat to his throne. The toil began at dawn. Every day was a grueling march through the treacherous mountain passes of the high Rockies. The air was so thin, it felt like breathing glass. Francois cracked the whip, calling out commands that echoed against the granite cliffs. Shadow pulled with the strength of 3 dogs. He felt the weight of the sled dragging behind him. He felt the burn in his lungs. But Koda was a master of sabotage. When they crossed narrow ridges, Koda would swerve, trying to force Shadow off the trail. When they slept in the snow at night, Koda would steal Shadow's meager portion of dried fish. The lead dog wanted Shadow broken. He wanted the giant to fail. Shadow did not snap back. Not yet. He watched. He learned. His amber eyes followed every move Koda made. He saw how Koda bullied the weaker dogs. He saw how the pack pulled out of fear, not out of pride. The tension grew like a tightening wire. The turning point came on a night when the sky turned the color of a bruised plum. A blood-red moon hung over the jagged peaks, casting long crimson shadows across the ice. The team was crossing a frozen lake, the surface groaning under the weight of the sled. Francois shouted a warning. The ice was thin. Koda saw his chance. As the lead dog, he deliberately veered toward a dark patch of slush. He leaped across the gap, knowing the heavy weight of Shadow would cause the ice to shatter behind him. The world exploded in a spray of freezing water. Shadow felt the ice give way. The freezing lake swallowed his hind legs. The weight of the sled began to pull the entire pack into the abyss. Panic erupted. The other dogs screamed and clawed at the slippery edges. Koda stood on solid ground, watching with a cold, triumphant gaze. But Shadow was a son of the wild. He dug his front claws into the solid ice. His muscles bunched and rippled under his charcoal fur. He did not panic. He did not waste his breath on a bark. With a heave that seemed to crack the very earth, Shadow pulled. He dragged himself out of the black water. He dragged the sled onto the thick ice. He saved the pack. Shadow stood dripping his fur, instantly turning into a coat of silver needles. He walked slowly toward the front of the line. He walked past the shivering dogs. He walked until he was inches from Koda's face. The pack went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Koda lunged first. He was fast, a white blur of teeth aimed at Shadow's throat. Shadow took the hit on his thick, dark mane. The fur protected his jugular. Koda tried to circle, looking for a weakness, but Shadow stood like a mountain. When Koda lunged again, Shadow did not use his teeth. He used his weight. He slammed his massive chest into Koda, sending the white dog tumbling across the ice. Koda scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide with shock. Shadow didn't wait. He moved with a calculated ferocity. He pinned Koda to the frozen ground, his jaws hovering just above the white dog's neck. Shadow did not bite down. He didn't have to. He looked deep into Koda's eyes with a steady amber flame. He was showing Koda the difference between a bully and a king. Koda whimpered. The white dog went limp. He surrendered his pride to the frozen wind. The next morning, Francois went to hitch the team. He tried to put Koda in the lead. Shadow stepped forward. He nudged Koda aside with a firm, silent shoulder. Shadow looked at Francois. He looked at the trail ahead. He stood at the head of the line, his white-chipped tail held high like a banner. Francois grinned, his breath misting in the air. "So be it, giant," he whispered. The change was immediate. Shadow did not lead through fear. He led through rhythm. He sensed when a dog was tiring and adjusted his pace. He found the safe paths through the snow that Coda had ignored. The pack began to pull as one soul. They flew across the frozen tundra. They broke speed records that had stood for years. At night, the dogs no longer huddled in separate corners of the snow. They gathered around Shadow. He was their shield. He was their silent commander. The charcoal fur and the silver-white mane became a symbol of hope for the weary team. Even Coda, humbled and quiet, pulled harder than he ever had before. Shadow lay in the snow, his amber eyes watching the stars. He was far from the sunny valley of his birth. His body was Han in Dao Vet of the trail. But for the first time since the betrayal, he felt a sense of purpose. He was not just a dog. He was the alpha. The silence of the mountains was his music, and the pack was his family. Chapter 5. The Edge of Darkness. The glory of the trail did not last. After months of tireless service, Perrault and François received new orders. The mail was finished. The government was moving on. The great team was sold. They were bought by 3 people who had no business in the north. Charles Hall and Mercedes. They were seekers of gold. They were people of the city driven by greed and a dangerous ignorance. They were what the locals called greenhorns. From the very first day, the tragedy began to unfold. The sled was overloaded with useless things, heavy porcelain dishes, folding chairs, piles of blankets that would soon be soaked with slush. The runners of the sled were buried deep in the soft snow. "Mush!" Hal shouted, cracking a heavy whip. His voice was thin and lacked the authority of a true woodsman. Shadow leaned into the harness. He dug his charcoal paws into the earth, his massive frame straining against the weight. But the sled would not budge. The other dogs, already tired from the previous season, whined in confusion. "They are lazy," Mercedes cried. "Hit them harder." Hal did not hesitate. The whip lashed out again and again. Shadow felt the sting across his flanks. It was not the purposeful correction of François. It was the chaotic violence of a man who was afraid of his own failure. Eventually, the sled moved, but it moved at a price. The suffering became a constant companion. The new owners did not understand how to measure food. They fed the dogs too much in the beginning, and then the bags ran dry. Starvation began to hollow out the pack. Shadow's majestic presence began to fade. The thick charcoal fur grew dull. The powerful muscles that had once rippled like silk began to wither. His deep chest became a cage of visible ribs. He was becoming a skeleton held together by sheer will. One by one, his brothers fell. The younger dogs died first, their hearts stopping in the middle of the trail. Hal would simply unhitch them and leave their bodies for the wolves. Shadow watched them go. His amber eyes were sunken into his skull. He was the alpha of a dying empire. The spring thaw arrived, and with it came a new terror. The ice was rotting. The rivers were becoming treacherous veins of black water and crushing bergs. The team reached a camp on the banks of the White River. A lone man sat by a small fire watching them approach with pity in his eyes. This was Silas. He was a hermit, a man who had lived in the high country long enough to know when death was walking on 4 legs. "Stop there," Silas called out. His voice was like the sound of grinding stones. "The ice is gone. You will not make the crossing." Hal ignored him. He was obsessed with the gold that lay somewhere beyond the horizon. The ice held yesterday. It will hold today. He turned to the dogs. They were a pathetic sight. They were shivering, their heads hanging low. Shadow was at the front, his legs trembling. He looked at the river. He smelled the rot. He knew. Mush! Hal screamed. The team did not move. They could not. Shadow sat down in the slush. He closed his eyes. He was finished with the world of men and their madness. Hal went into a frenzy. He grabbed a heavy club, the same kind of weapon used by the man in the red sweater. He began to beat Shadow. The blows fell on the dog's head, his shoulders, his spine. Shadow felt the pain, but it seemed far away. He felt his life leaking out into the cold mud. He did not snarl. He did not fight back. He simply waited for the darkness to take him. "Stop it," Silas roared. The hermit leapt from his seat. He was an old man, but he moved with the speed of a mountain lion. He shoved Hal aside with a force that sent the younger man sprawling into the snow. Silas stood over Shadow. He looked down at the broken giant. He saw the matted charcoal fur. He saw the white tip of the tail now stained with filth. But then Shadow opened his eyes. Silas looked deep into those amber depths. He did not see a beast. He did not see a tool for pulling a sled. He saw a soul. He saw a warrior who had been betrayed by every human he had ever served. "I am taking this dog," Silas said. His voice was quiet now, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. "He is mine," Hal yelled, reaching for his knife. "I paid for him." Silas reached into his heavy coat. He pulled out a small, weathered leather pouch. He tossed it at Hal's feet. It hit the ground with a heavy metallic thud. "That is my last bag of gold dust," Silas said. "It is more than that dog is worth in meat. Take it and go. If you stay, the river will take you anyway." Hal grabbed the gold. Greed was the only language he truly spoke. He turned back to his sled, cursing the dogs and the river. He forced the remaining animals onto the ice. Shadow lay still. He watched as the sled moved away. He watched as the ice groaned and buckled. A sudden thunderous crack echoed through the valley. The river opened its mouth. In a heartbeat, the sled, the people, and the last of the pack were gone. Silence returned to the white river. Shadow felt a hand on his head. It was not a club. It was not a whip. It was a hand that was rough with work, yet incredibly gentle. "You are safe now, traveler," Silas whispered. Silas lifted the massive dog into his arms. It was a struggle, for even in his skeletal state, Shadow was heavy. The hermit carried him back toward a small, secluded cabin hidden among the pines. Shadow rested his chin on the man's shoulder. The white tip of his tail flickered once, a tiny spark of life. The world was still cold. The world was still cruel. But for the first time in a very long time, Shadow felt something he thought he had lost forever. He felt a heartbeat that beat in rhythm with his own. Chapter 6. The Healing Silence. The silence in the cabin was not empty. It was a healing thing. It was the sound of wood popping in the stove and the steady rhythm of a man breathing in his sleep. For many weeks, Shadow did not move far from the hearth. He lay on a bed of thick elk skins. His body was a map of past cruelties. But under the care of Silas, the map began to fade. Silas did not force him to stand. He did not shout. He simply sat nearby, carving wood or cleaning his rifle. He spoke to Shadow in a low, gravelly hum, not as a master to a slave, but as one survivor to another. Gradually, the charcoal gray fur began to regrow. It came back thicker than before, lustrous and deep. The silver-white streaks on his chest regained their moonlight glow. The gaunt hollows of his ribs filled with hard, functional muscle. Shadow was returning. The giant was waking up. But it was his soul that mended last. He had learned to fear the human hand. He had learned to hate the human voice. Yet Silas was different. One afternoon, Silas reached out. He did not grab. He simply rested his hand on the crown of Shadow's head. Shadow flinched, his amber eyes clouded with a dark memory. But Silas did not move his hand. He kept it there, warm, steady, honest. Shadow let out a long, shuddering breath. He leaned his heavy head into the man's palm. In that moment, the last of the ice around his heart melted away. As the seasons shifted, they became a team of two. They hunted the high ridges together. Shadow would scent the elk long before Silas could see them. Silas would share the best cuts of meat by the evening fire. There were no harnesses. There were no whips. There was only mutual respect. Shadow found a peace he had not known since the valley of his birth. He was a protector again. He was loved. But the wild was never far away. At night, when the moon hung like a silver coin over the pines, the sounds would begin. The long, mournful howls of the timber wolves. It was a song Shadow knew in his marrow. It was the voice of his ancestors. He would stand at the door of the cabin, his ears pricked. He would feel a strange, primal tug in his chest. The call. It told him he belonged to the shadows. It told him he was meant for the hunt and the deep forest. He would look at the forest. Then he would look at Silas sitting by the fire. He was torn between two worlds. One was built on firelight and friendship. The other was built on blood and moonlight. He would return to Silas's side and lay his head on the man's knee. The white tip of his tail would sweep the floor. For now the love for the man was stronger than the call of the wood. Then came the day of the great bear. They were trekking through a dense thicket of berry bushes near a rushing stream. The wind was blowing toward them, masking the scent of danger. Suddenly the brush exploded. A massive grizzly bear reared up. It was a mountain of fur and fury. It towered over Silas, its roar shaking the very needles on the pines. Silas reached for his rifle, but his foot slipped on a mossy rock. He fell. The rifle clattered away out of reach. The bear lunged, its massive claws raised for a killing strike. Shadow did not hesitate. He did not think of his own safety. He became a blur of charcoal and silver. He struck the bear's shoulder with the force of a falling boulder. He was half the size of the grizzly, but he possessed the spirit of 1,000 wolves. He snapped at the bear's throat, his teeth flashing in the sun. The bear roared in surprise and turned its fury on the dog. Shadow moved like lightning. He dodged the heavy paws. He bit and tore, circling the beast with a calculated ferocity. He was protecting his soul. He was protecting his brother. Silas scrambled to his feet. He grabbed his rifle. He found his mark. One sharp crack echoed through the canyon. The bear stumbled. It let out a final hollow groan and collapsed into the brush. Silence returned to the forest. Only the sound of the rushing stream remained. Silas was shaking. He looked at Shadow. The dog was standing over the bear, his chest heaving. A small streak of red ran down Shadow's shoulder, but he did not seem to notice. He was watching Silas. The man walked over and pulled the massive dog into a desperate embrace. He buried his face in the thick charcoal mane. "You saved me," Silas whispered, his voice breaking. "You beautiful, brave soul." Shadow let out a soft whine. He licked the man's weathered cheek. The bond was no longer just a friendship. It was a covenant, a link that transcended species and language. In the weeks that followed, a deep serenity settled over them. Shadow felt a joy he had forgotten existed. He would run through the meadows, chasing the scent of the wind. He would play with Silas, dodging and weaving like a puppy. In these moments, he found the soul of the dog he had been in the Bitterroot Valley. The bitterness was gone. The fear was gone. He was whole. He knew the wolves were still out there. He knew the call would come again. But as he lay by the fire, his head resting on Silas's boots, he was content. He had found a home in the heart of a man. And for a warrior who had known only the club and the fang, that was the greatest victory of all. Chapter 7. Legend of the Silver Tip. The scent of blood hung heavy in the air. Shadow returned from a long, solitary hunt. His paws, once soft on the carpets of Sterling, now moved with the silent grace of a phantom. He carried a young buck in his powerful jaws. Food for Silas. Warmth for the cabin. But as he neared their home, an unnatural stillness descended. The familiar scent of wood smoke was gone, replaced by something acrid, something foul, something terribly wrong. He dropped the buck. His charcoal fur bristled. His amber eyes narrowed. He moved forward with silent, deadly purpose. Every primitive instinct screamed danger. The cabin door hung open, splintered and broken. Inside, chaos reigned. Furniture was overturned. Silas's few possessions were scattered across the floor. The scent of fear, the scent of violence, and the undeniable, heartbreaking scent of human blood. Shadow let out a low growl. It started deep in his chest. It vibrated through the very timbers of the cabin. It grew into a guttural roar of pure, unadulterated rage. Silas was gone. His friend, his savior, his only human connection to a world that had always tried to break him. Gone. The pain was a physical blow. It twisted his gut. It burned behind his eyes. It was the betrayal of Manuel all over again. But this time the victim was not just himself. It was the man who had shown him love. Shadow went outside. His nose swept the ground. He found the tracks. 3 men, heavy boots, the distinct smell of cheap tobacco and stale whiskey. Outlaws. His rage turned cold. It became a precise instrument of vengeance. The wild was fully awake now. It was not the joyous howl of a hunter. It was the silent fury of a spirit seeking justice. He began to track them. He moved through the forest like a shadow in his own name. He paid no mind to the familiar sounds of the wilderness. His focus was absolute. His purpose was clear. Days blurred into nights. He followed the scent. He followed the broken branches. He found their abandoned campsites. He learned their habits. He became the ultimate predator. The first man was found near a lonely fishing stream. He was a scout separated from his companions. He heard a soft rustle in the bushes. He turned. He saw 2 burning amber eyes, then a flash of charcoal fur and a final scream swallowed by the wind. Shadow did not leave a body. He left only a set of paw prints in the soft mud and a single pure white hair caught on a thorny bush. The silver tip had arrived. The second man was bigger. He was careless. He drank too much whiskey and fell asleep by his fire. Shadow approached like a ghost. He moved with the silent, deadly precision of a seasoned hunter. The man woke to a sudden crushing weight, a growl that vibrated through his bones, then silence. Again only prints in the frost, and a single silver-white hair tangled in the man's dirty beard. The last man was the leader. He was cunning. He had seen the signs. He knew what was hunting them. He frantically rode his horse through the forest, desperate to escape the phantom. But no horse could outrun the fury of a wronged wolf dog. Shadow found him huddled in a desolate cave, shivering with terror. The man raised his rifle, his hands shaking. He fired. The bullet whizzed past Shadow's ear, but the giant was too fast, too driven. Shadow closed the distance in a single powerful bound. There was no mercy in his eyes, only the cold, ancient justice of the wild. He delivered the final, swift blow. Then he stood over the body, his head thrown back. He let out a long, mournful howl. It was a sound that echoed the deepest sorrow. It was a farewell to his friend, It was a statement to the mountains. Justice had been served. He stood in the cave for a long time. He looked at the setting sun. He looked at the moon beginning to rise. The last connection to the human world was severed. Silas was gone. The prince was gone. The dog was gone. Shadow was now a complete creature of the wilderness. He began to travel back through the mountains. He moved with a new purpose, not for revenge, but for belonging. He followed the scent of a familiar pack, the timber wolves, his true kin. When he reached them, they met him with caution. They sensed his power. They sensed his history, but they also sensed the deep wolf blood that flowed in his veins. He did not fight for leadership this time. He simply took it. His presence commanded respect. His experience commanded authority. He became the Alpha, the ghost of the high Rockies. The legend whispered around campfires, the silver tip. The camera zooms into the rusted collar, the one found by the hunter in Chapter 1. Shadow approaches the same desolate campsite. He nudges the collar with his nose. He looks at the faded sterling nameplate, a faint memory of sun-drenched days, of gentle hands, of a life that was. He nudges it again. Then, with a soft sigh that sounds almost human, he lets it drop into the snow. He turns his back on the flickering orange glow of the distant campfire. He turns his back on the last remnants of human civilization. He walks into the trees. Behind him, his new pack emerges from the shadows. They follow their alpha, silent, majestic, wild. A final shot. Shadow stands on a moonlit ridge. His charcoal fur blends with the night. His silver-white streaks catch the pale light. His white-tipped tail is raised a beacon against the vast, dark sky. He is home. He is no longer a dog. He is no longer a slave. The path he walked was paved with betrayal and hardship, but it led him to his true self. He is the spirit of the mountains. He is the echo of the wild heart. He is the legend of the silver tip. In the end, Shadow's journey reminds us that true loyalty is not a chain we wear, but a flame that burns within the heart, surviving even the coldest winters and the deepest betrayals. May we all find a bond as unshakable as the one between a man and his wolf, and the quiet courage to follow our own call, no matter where it leads. If this legend touched your soul today, we would be honored to have you join our pack by subscribing to the channel and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your kindness helps us keep these stories alive, so please like and share this video before you click the next story appearing on your screen right now.